How the fuck did I miss out on Battle Angel? Seriously, this is pretty much everything I'm into. Cyberpunk world, 90s anime, badass characters, excessive violence. This is my jam. I have no idea how this series went right over my head. For those who don't know, Battle Angel Alita is the English name for the Japanese cyberpunk manga series created by Yukito Kishiro. The manga was first published in 1991 and ran for 9 volumes until 95. It was soon followed by a sequel series that ran from 2001 to 2014, with another sequel series still going to this day. Battle Angel tells the story of a young cyborg named Alita, who is on a quest to find her true self in a violent world where one wrong move can make the difference between life and death. Though there was never an anime series, 2 half-hour OVAs were released in 1993 based on the first 2 volumes of the manga, and though they weren't an exact adaptation, they were still pretty badass and introduced some original ideas not present in the source material. Like I said, I had no idea this series even existed, but all of that changed when I saw the trailer for the live-action adaptation Alita Battle Angel. This live-action anime adaptation was produced by none other than James Cameron. How the fuck did that happen? Apparently, Cameron was introduced to the series by Guillermo del Toro. He was enamored with the concept and signed with 20th Century Fox to direct a film adaptation in April 2003. But he repeatedly put the film on hold for other projects. He was obviously too busy working on Avatar 2, and Avatar 3, and Avatar 4, and Avatar 5, and Avatar the Animated Series, and Avatar the Musical, and Avatar the Porno. Seriously, Cameron, just move on. So he stepped back to serve as a producer and gave the directing duties to Robert Rodriguez. Rodriguez has directed movies like El Mariachi, From Dusk Till Dawn, Sin City, and Planet Terror. But he also directed the Spy Kids trilogy and Shark Boy and Lava Girl. While Cameron is known to have a million projects that never see the light of day, Rodriguez is known to be very involved with almost every aspect of the filmmaking process, to the point where he has been deemed a one-man crew. Regardless of what you think of his films, you can't say that Hollywood doesn't make it a point to use every part of the Robert Rodriguez. The trailer for Alita Battle Angel caught my attention largely because of how obvious the anime influence was. I was interested in seeing a live-action adaptation that made it a point to retain some aspects of the original art style. I was cautiously optimistic because adaptations of popular series are often done by either people who don't fully understand the source material, or they are changed massively to work as a contained film, which usually results in the fanbase being unhappy with the final product. So, did this live-action anime adaptation manage to strike a balance between being faithful and being good? Or is it another example of Hollywood cashing in on a popular franchise? Well, here we go. This is Alita Battle Angel. The film starts out in the post-apocalyptic Iron City. A cybernetic doctor, Dyson Ito, is scavenging through a scrapyard when he stumbles upon a disembodied cyborg. Though she is clearly damaged, her brain is still intact, so Ito takes it upon himself to rebuild her. When she awakens, he introduces himself, but the girl has no memory of who she is or what happened to her. He lets the young cyborg stay with him and names her Alita. Initially, Ito just wants Alita to help him around the lab and be someone he can take care of, but it soon becomes apparent that Alita's interests are far more intense than he could have predicted. She quickly becomes fascinated with the city's violent sports, and she starts hanging out with a young street rat named Hugo, who is hell-bent on getting out of the slums and up to Zalem, a floating utopia above the city. Due to a string of murders in town, Ito forbids Alita from staying out late. However, she starts to notice that Ito himself is going out late at night and coming home with injuries. One night she decides to follow him and learns that he is a hunter-warrior, a bounty hunter that serves as law enforcement. Ito and Alita are attacked by a gang of serial killers, but Alita manages to fight them off. She is told that her fighting style is called Panzerkunst, a long-lost combat art. On top of that revelation, she has a memory flash of her past life during the fight. She becomes convinced that the only way to discover her true self is through combat and registers as a hunter-warrior against Ito's wishes. From this point on, Alita has to navigate her way through the seedy underbelly of Iron City and discover her past life while trying to protect her new one. As you can tell from that description, there's a lot of layers to this story, and for the most part it's handled well, though it does stumble out of the gate initially. Within the first 25 minutes, there are 3 scenes of moving exposition dumps and they are not disguised very well. This cutaway from exposition to fun world building back to exposition is pretty apparent. Maybe they could have benefited by dumping most of the backstory and world building in the beginning and leaving some of the finer details to be dealt out by the characters. Alita, being the classic fish out of water, is going to have exposition spewed at her regardless, so it would have been smarter to have the world history be dumped on us in the beginning and have the workings of Iron City be explained to the audience when it's being explained to her. I should note that this adaptation is a mix of the manga and the OVA, so while the general story is pretty faithful, the players involved are all mixed around. Gruishka is an adaptation of the manga character and Chirin is an OVA exclusive character. Most of these changes make sense though. Chirin is used to add an additional layer to Ito's backstory, and I get why they didn't want to use the original story with Makaku cause it was weird. I would say that this is a well-directed film in a lot of ways. The pacing is good and it never really feels like we're jumping around too much despite the heavy amount of backstory. There's this kinetic energy early on that transitions well into the intense action we see later. The action in this movie is fantastic. It's fast-paced, heavy-hitting, and fucking brutal. They really exploit that blue blood loophole to keep this at a PG-13 because this is a really violent film. CGI action movies don't usually do much for me because it's clear that it's all computers, but this was done in a way that it's still just savage at times. This is helped by the fact that almost all of the fight scenes are filmed with no shaky cam and they are not overly chopped up. And the shots themselves are framed in a way that I can follow the action even at the speed some of these fights go at. There is a somewhat excessive use of slow-mo, and while it does look cool at times, it does mess with the pace of some of these high-speed moments. I think it's clear to anyone watching, but the effects and the set design of this film are fucking incredible. The use of CGI and physical sets blend seamlessly, and there is so much meticulous detail in everything. The most obvious example being Alita herself. Rosa Salazar was on set in her motion capture suit, but she was mostly there for reference. Alita is pretty much all CG and it usually looks convincing. Her first scene where she is touching the mirror, I could have sworn that hand was really there, but it was all CG. When she wakes up, there is so much detail in her skin, right down to this tiny little scar on her nose and the folds in her skin. Even the hair is completely CG, and I had no idea for the majority of the runtime. This treatment extends to many of the other cyborgs. They all have such intricate and detailed designs, and I could stare at every little part of them and find something interesting. I think the first thing people noticed about the film was Alita's eyes. It was what made me realize this was an anime adaptation. And I know there's some mixed opinions on them, and I would say for the most part, they actually look pretty good. There are some shots where they really look like a live-action anime character, but there are a handful when they look fairly off-putting and the uncanny valley starts to kick in. There aren't a lot of them, but I can see why they would bother some viewers. It ultimately depends on your own perception, but I was mostly fine with them. One thing I did notice though is how out of place some of the extras seem to be. Right next to some of these cyborgs and bounty hunters, we have Greg, or Marco, or fucking Bill. Why is Bill in this movie? He owes me money! The only real problem I have with the direction is the dialogue. It's really corny sometimes, and it hurts some of the more badass moments.
Your freak girlfriend's got some serious malfunction.
I do not stand by in the presence of evil. Does it bother you that I'm not completely human?
You are the most human person I have ever met.
I'd give you my heart.
This Riverdale-style dialogue does not fit with the raw, gritty nature of this world at all. It's hard to take some of this seriously when Alita literally says "Hi-ya." Rosa Salazar definitely struggles with some of these lines, but it's not her fault. How the fuck do you deliver some of this dialogue in a badass way? She tries her best, but the direction and the script let her down in this department. As a character, Alita is exactly what she needed to be. She starts out naive and uncertain, but over time, her true instincts come out. She becomes confident, snarky, and ruthless, but she retains those hopeful ideals and her compassion for those close to her. One little touch I loved is that the film starts with a confused Alita staring at herself in the mirror. This scene is echoed after her first fight, where she is beginning to truly understand who she is and doesn't feel helpless anymore. It's a subtle but effective way to show her character progression. I would say that Rosa Salazar is pretty good as Alita. I think they could have probably gotten a younger actress to play her though. Alita is supposed to be physically built like a teenager, but she comes off more like an adult here, and her voice is a bit deeper than I would have expected. Because she comes off more like an adult, some of her naivety and fish out of water reactions feel a bit disingenuous. Acting wise though, she's pretty solid. They made a real effort to preserve her performance even with all the CG, and I would say they succeeded in doing that, especially after watching the side-by-side comparison. She is able to pull off the badass fighter, the snarky teenager, and the idealistic dreamer relatively well. The only thing I'm not buying is the naive young girl part, and like I said, I think that's more of a casting issue than an issue with her acting. But I gotta give her credit, she turned in a good performance while wearing all of that motion capture crap for every single one of her scenes. That had to be miserable. Kudos, girl. Christoph Waltz is the most perfect Ito we could have asked for. He looks just like the manga version, and he's versatile enough that I believe him in every role he's doing. I buy him as a loving father, a caring doctor, and a badass hunter warrior. The progression of his relationship with Alita is one of the best things in the movie. They really go through almost every phase of a father-daughter relationship. It starts off with him simply taking care of her and giving her rules like a child. Then their relationship goes through an angsty, rebellious phase where she wants to live by her own rules and do her own thing against his wishes. But then they come back around and he accepts her decision and does his best to help her along the way. It's a really smooth and natural progression. The dynamic between these two is greatly enhanced by Ito's backstory and his motives for rescuing Alita from the scrapyard. He's a character who has experienced a lot of tragedy, but this makes every softer moment with him feel more genuine. Most of the supporting cast is pretty solid, and I think they are good interpretations of the source material while still being grounded in this world. Some of the more over-the-top characters have been toned down a bit, which complements the harsher atmosphere this movie is going for. The only person I'm not sold on is Hugo. This actor is completely miscast. I don't really see him as a rough, aspirational street rat. He comes off like a high school kid in an 80s coming-of-age movie. I should not be thinking of Marty McFly during this gritty cyberpunk film. This isn't his fault, as his acting is fine, he's just not the right person for this role. The way he is introduced into the plot is forced, and I think they could have kept him as Ito's repairman, and it would have prevented us from having two back-to-back scenes of someone saving Alita from danger. The introduction of Motorball is included to add more action and serves as a decent substitute for Alita just killing people for money, but I don't understand the rules of this game at all. Are there no fouls? Motorball? More like murder ball. I'm dead inside. At least Harry Potter explained Quidditch. I had to go to the Blu-ray extras to figure out how this game works, which is a problem. If I don't know the rules, I don't know how to react to certain events within the match or what moves aren't legal. I guess that's a nitpick, but it was driving me crazy. There are a lot of great things in the movie, but it has one major weakness: the narrative. This film has almost no structure. I struggle to summarize the plot because there is barely one to talk about. The majority of it is just a series of events happening that comes across like it was more structured for a TV series rather than a self-contained film. The overall narrative is based on the first 2 volumes of the manga, but they are not blended together in a way where they tell a singular story. If that weren't enough, they pull some stuff from later volumes and they are really out of place. Even before I read the manga, the inclusion of Nova came across as confusing, random, and not earned. They shoehorned him into the story and it ends up being overly cluttered. There are too many villains here. We have Gruishka, Nova, Chirin, Vector, and Zapan.
Looking good, Francis.
None of them are the one true bad guy. They all come across as people fighting over the spotlight. The grand villain is set up to be Nova, but his involvement and character are so minimal that it doesn't feel like there are any stakes. This could have been cut entirely. Because the movie is too busy cramming in random parts of the manga, we miss out on fully understanding character motivation. Nova could have been cut out to give us more insight on Hugo's backstory, which would have given us a better understanding of his motivation and add more emotional weight to the ending. The same could be said for Chirin and her last-minute change of heart. Without fully understanding her, it comes off as random and out of nowhere. They needed some kind of scene where she remembered her old life and who she used to be. She was too cold before for this character shift to work so suddenly. And Alita trying to discover her backstory doesn't feel like the main driving force at all. It's just something that pops up every now and then to remind us that it's a thing. This, combined with two mishmashed volumes of the manga and an overabundance of villains, results in the film balancing between too many storylines and none of them stick the landing perfectly. The main goal of the first half seems to be killing Gruishka, but he disappears halfway through and doesn't come back until the last 10 minutes, only to be dispatched in a very anticlimactic way. The second half focuses more on Hugo and Alita, but we don't know enough about Hugo for this to be as effective. This problem is only enhanced by how miscast the actor is. Honestly, this whole thing lacks a climax. It doesn't do much to hook the audience other than great action and good characters. Stuff just happens and then it's like, be sure to see the sequel. In the overall story, very little has progressed. Alita still doesn't fully know her true identity, and we don't understand who she's even up against. When the credits came around, I should have been hyped, but instead I was sort of like, oh, okay then. It didn't leave me wanting more, it just left me wishing it did. It's hard to really get a vibe off this movie. I mean, there's a lot of good in it, but the bad really drags it down. The characters, the world, the action, the set design, all of it is really good, but it's not good enough to offset how arbitrary the story feels and how corny the dialogue is. I love so many things in it, but I can't fully get on board. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm willing to overlook story problems if the characters are good enough, but the story still needs to play a big part in driving the characters' motivations, which this film lacks in a lot of ways. It's a bunch of cool people doing cool shit for some reason. But with that said, as a manga adaptation, this is pretty fucking dope. So much of the visual design and the characters look like they leapt right off the pages, and this is made even more impressive because of the cyberpunk backdrop. Adaptations like Fullmetal Alchemist had worlds that were close enough to reality to make adapting it easier, but Battle Angel's world is so far out there that it really is amazing that this film looks so authentic. It's a hard one to judge. For general audiences, Alita Battle Angel is a 6 out of 10. The lack of structure really drags it down. For fans of the manga, it's probably an 8 out of 10 because it's such a feat to have an adaptation be this faithful while still managing to have its own unique appeal. For me personally, when I first saw the movie, I was definitely leaning towards a 6, but after reading the manga and watching the OVAs, I've come to appreciate more of it. So, the final score for Alita Battle Angel is a 7 out of 10. It's great as a bit of supplementary fan service, but I don't think it works well on its own merits. The biggest tragedy is that while it sequel baits at the end, it's fairly unlikely that a sequel will actually happen. The movie was produced by 20th Century Fox, but Fox was purchased by Disney a few months after it came out. There has been no mention of a sequel being in the works, and Christoph Waltz has said that it is unlikely that one will be made because it doesn't fit underneath the Disney umbrella. As time goes on, I think that everyone will look back on Alita Battle Angel as that weird but cool sci-fi movie that just came and went. It'll probably be remembered fondly, but will ultimately be a mere footnote in the franchise's legacy. So what did you guys think? This movie had a pretty big difference between the critical reception and the audience reception, so I'm curious to what degree it interested you. Let me know in the comments below, and remember, I'll see you guys on the next episode of Ranting Spider-Man.